read this without see if I can read this without my glasses. Thanks for joining us, Andrew, and I'm glad you resolved your internet problems. Andrew Stebelsky is a native of Windsor, Ontario. He's of Ukrainian ancestry, so that'll be interesting for us to hear. Graduate of University of Windsor, honors BA in Geography in 1994 and Bachelor's of Education in 1995. Lived and worked in Ukraine from 95 to 98 and started up a private English language school from kindergarten to grade 12. Pershik School International in Kiev, and maybe you can help pronounce it better if I didn't pronounce it right. Educator now for Greater Essex County District School Board for over 20 years and currently teaching geography and law at Tecumseh Vista School, which is one of the schools that receives our bursaries. I'm sure he'll tell you more about himself and give us some insights too. Let's all give a nice, give Andrew a nice warm Windsor St. Clair welcome. Welcome, Andrew.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks. And thank you for the introduction. I know there's some short bit of time here, so I'm going to try to go through this material about the Ukraine-Russia war as succinctly as I possibly can. I would like to first go do an overview about the current situation and also some background information that seems to be missing in the media and the picture with regards to why the war is occurring or have an understanding for why the sides are having this sort of conflict. So then we'll take some time, I guess, for a question and answer. So first, to begin with, Ukraine is situated in Eastern Europe. It's the second largest country in Europe after Russia. It had a population of 43 million, and it's quickly declining due to the refugees that are fleeing the country. And many are moving on to Europe and other parts of the world. This here is a map showing you the topography of the country. You'll notice that it's very, there are highlands and mountains on the west, and the rolling hills and prairies to the south and east of the country. This is how the country looks like through its administrative boundaries. These are the provinces, as it were, of Ukraine. There are 25 of them. Also, I thought that might be of some interest to members in the Rotary Club is the economy. Ukraine's known for its manufacturing, energy, agriculture and food processing, metals and minerals, transportation. It has an IT sector that's well renowned and a very highly educated workforce. So many of the refugees that are fleeing to Europe and Canada, some of them coming from the large cities, have certain skill sets in areas such as this. Ukraine has an ancient history dating back to the Trypillian culture or the Neolithic period, 4,000 years. Basically, it's consisted of a federation, a tribal federation known as the Kievan Rus that existed between the 9th and the 13th century, followed by a period called the Cossack Hetman state in the 16th to 18th centuries. So in the next slide, you'll see this is the way in which the people lived. They're the indigenous people. They migrated from Anatolia, which is today Turkey, and they settled into what is now Romania and Ukraine. And that is the core group of people that existed. And then later on, through migrations, there was intermixing. So here's a display of some of the artifacts of that period and way in which people lived. And here's a map showing you how they traded with the rest of Europe. So Ukrainians at that time were also known as Scythians, and they traded with the ancient Greeks and the Mediterranean world. And you can see how Crimea in the picture there shows its interactions with the Mediterranean culture. Okay, here is a map showing you where Russia was at the time that we know of Moscow and St. Petersburg. Those people in the Neolithic period lived as hunters and gatherers, and they mixed in with the Finnic Ugric or tribes, with Finns and Mari people and so forth. And they established their centers around Novgorod, okay, so, and Muscovians and Vladimir Suzdal area and Ryazan. So they tended to have their own um, culture established around that center. And then later on, when the Vikings came, they established what was called the Kievan Rus. You'll notice the map on the upper left here showing you that connection. Why is that? Well, because the Dnieper River and the rivers up in the north were connected. They were interconnected. And so there was a huge trade between the Finnic world up in the Arctic near the north down into Byzantium. So with that also came the Christianity from Byzantium. So that's why they're Orthodox and why they had the Eastern Christian culture adopted as such. Here you'll see that in the next map, the Varangians who established the Kievan Rus, they intermarried with the local population, and here the Mongols in around 1240 smashed this federation, which had a strong connection with the Mediterranean and European worlds at that time, and the Mongols basically dismembered this state. So the people that lived on that territory ended up living under another empire, the Mongol Empire. So Kiev's destruction by the Mughal horde left a legacy where the surviving princes shifted westwards towards Halych Volhynia, and so they had interconnections with Poland and the rest of Europe, whereas the Moscow area, if geographically, becomes submits to the Mongol way of living. So it adopts autocracy and governance from the Mongol hordes. So here you see a dichotomy. So here the Western, the Kievan Rus people who maintained connections with Europe continued to evolve with the European history and European economies, whereas the people living in the north were under the control of the Mongols, and they adopted another form of philosophy. So that's somehow you can see that to this very day, the conflict between West and East comes from this as well. So while the Ukrainians in the European connections with Poland and with Lithuania, they form what is called the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So this is where Ukraine, the people of Ukraine have established a long heritage of a connection with Europe through all the different periods of European history, from the Renaissance to the Reformation. And it's expressed in their culture, the architecture of Ukraine as well. This is the Hetman state. This is the leader of the Ukrainian Cossacks, Bogdan Khmelnytsky. Again, he establishes the first modern Ukrainian state, which existed at that period. There's a story about the period which it came to its ruin, which I'm going to skip because we won't have time for that. But what's important here afterwards is the Cossack independence, the Mazepa period. There was the Battle of Poltava in 1709, when the Ukrainians at that time sided with Sweden, and Peter the Great destroyed the army at the Battle of Poltava, and so the Ukrainians ended up having to go into exile, and they established their constitution. So it was the first constitution of a democratic nature established in 1710. Okay, so this fellow named Philip Orlik establishes this pact. The constitution of that period is now housed in Sweden, which is kind of very interesting, because that's where eventually Philip Orlik's descendants ended up staying or living in exile at the time. Okay, so Ukraine at this period of time is divided up between the Austrian Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Russian Empire. So this map here depicts these changes. You also see that the Ottoman Empire that used to control the southern part of Ukraine has been annexed by Russia. This is the time in which Russia begins to build its navy. Okay, now about Russia. Russia here starts in this dark green circled area around Moscow, and you can see that it expands. Its empire expands eastward towards Siberia. For them, that's why that explains why they're one of the world's largest countries in the world, because of that expansion to the east. But to the west, they were dismembering existing countries like Poland, and you'll notice that Poland doesn't appear as well here as a defined state with a boundary. And so so Russia is also expanding towards Europe that way. What's also interesting is that Russia expanded into Alaska and way down into California. So they have an idea of that. So when Putin talks about Russia and restoring it, he's thinking of it in terms of how Napoleon thought about how to expand his empire. And so wherever Russia may have explored, wherever they have people there, he's thinking about, well, we're going to try to go in and conquer these territories. It's a kind of an interesting story behind it. Here is what you would typically see in a school historical atlas showing where the countries existed. Note again, many countries are missing from here, and that's because the people there couldn't express their political aspirations or couldn't control their own territories. Even Finland was once part of Russia. Okay, you'll see Germany, Austria, Hungary, but you see Poland, but Poland's not really a country. It's just within the bounds of the Russian Empire, as well as Ukraine, and you'll notice that as well with others. Okay, so that's kind of where people who don't know their own history have a difficult time understanding why conflicts occur where they do. This map here shows the linguistic places of Ukraine. The red color represents people speaking Ukrainian, blue represents people speaking Russian, green represents people who speak Belarusian, and so on. Here's a map of Ukraine showing the boundaries of how it existed when Ukraine proclaimed its independence in 1918. After the Russian Revolution, the Ukrainians also wanted to form its own country and tried to establish it just like the Baltic countries and Poland did at the time. But in the maps here showing the shifting movements during the First World War to the Versailles Treaty, Ukraine was unable to establish its independence, and it became again divided. So Western Ukraine became part of Poland, parts of it became part of Romania, Czechoslovakia, and finally the remainder rumps part of Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. Okay, here's the Holodomor. So if you've ever seen the Holodomor monument at the Jackson Park, there's a monument to the 7 million Ukrainians that perished in the human-generated famine by Joseph Stalin. Here's a map of Ukraine showing the starvation in which a quarter of the population is starved to death. That's in red. So that gives you an idea of people being affected. This here shows the Russian Empire at the time, at its peak in the 1930s, during the Great Depression. We're here worried about how to feed ourselves and have a job, and here the Stalin is at the peak of his power, trying to control his own country and to become a world power in its own right. Here's a map showing how Ukraine was subdivided by those countries in the 30s. And here it shows the Cold War period in which Russia influenced Eastern Europe and China and so on through communism. After the war, Ukraine regains many of its own territories and is constituted in its present form of 1991 borders. And then getting to the part about the war, so Russia invades from the north and tries to take Kyiv in the Chernihiv area, and as you can see, it also invades from Crimea, which it occupied in 2014, and it tries tries to expand along the southern base of the country. And as you've been following the news, Ukraine has now been repulsing that. These images here show the country, the people that are in the country today who remain to fight, are doing all they can to repel the enemy and push them back to Russia. Here is a situation. This picture shows a Russian soldier captured by a Ukrainian army, and they made him call home to tell his mother where he is and to reassure the mother that he'll be returned. Here he's telling his mother that he didn't want to be fighting and so forth. So this is kind of one of the evidence of 18-year-olds being made to fight in Putin's army against Ukraine, especially if they didn't want to go and fight. Here is a map showing the refugee movement, and here is showing you the Russia's incursions into the country. This last map here is from as of September the 12th, showing you Ukraine's slow counteroffensive against Russia. So that's basically what I wanted to cover today. This map here shows you what the situation is at the moment, I'm just going to say one more thing before, if we run out of time any further, how you can help. Because I remember, Bruce, you were mentioning regarding about how a Rotary Club can be of assistance to Ukraine. Here is a list of organizations in which money could be channeled. The Ukraine Humanitarian Crisis Appeal through the Red Cross. It could be through the UN High Commission of Refugees. The Canada-Ukraine Foundation is very good at delivering that assistance directly because they have connections with the people there. Also, if you're thinking locally how to help families because we have 100 to 110 families in the local area who are being housed. There's an organization called WESUN, the Windsor Essex Supporting Ukrainian Newcomers organization. It's through the Ukrainian Catholic Church at St. Vladimir Noga. You can contact the priest there, Tom Hrivna, and you can find out about what the needs are, and if you're looking for something specific for young families, like diapers or clothing or furniture or whatever it is the needs are, you might be able to contact them through that. Okay, I think that's where I'll stop, and I'll take some questions.
Let's change the wow. Does anybody have any questions for Andrew in the room? I can't see who's on Zoom right at the moment, so I don't know if they have their hand up. Oh, Andrew, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
I can do that. Okay.
And if you ask a question, if you could come up. Carlo?
Yeah, well, my question is, first thought is, Ukraine, in all its different changes, has gained independence, what, 89 or 90 or something like that, I think?
1991.
91. So now we, of course, being democratic as we think, like, how is it that somebody can just go and try to take that independence back? I mean, that's the thing that irks me the most. So, like, I mean, what would you have to say to that? Or what is the general consensus of a lot of people, and why hasn't it been stopped by now? Maybe the extended part of the question.
Well, freedom has a price, and we take freedom for granted here in Canada. Like, I'm Canadian born, and I did travel to Ukraine, and I started to realize, as a Canadian born, going into another environment, to see that you have to earn it. And Canada earned its independence through World War I in the battles of Ypres and all the, like, there were hundreds of thousands of Canadian soldiers who died. Okay, and they came back home. And people wonder, well, why? What was the whole point of it? Well, it's the point that we shared a common bond of liberating countries. I mean, that was the whole point. World War II was the same thing. Britain was under pressure from Germany. A lot of Canadians of British descent went to Britain or whatever to fight. So the thing is that when you declare an independence, obviously you have to be willing to fight for it. And here you have a country willing to fight and die for their independence because they live there. And for a neighboring country to come in and invade, I mean, it would be as if, well, let's look at the possibility if Canada was invaded. When's the last time Canada was invaded? 200 years ago in the War of 1812. You know, so people who lived in southern Ontario and in Quebec, they didn't see, you know, the reason for us to join the United States. You know, so it's that sort of idea.
Bob.
Good morning, Andrew.
Hi, good morning.
Two questions. One, can you give us an update with regards to the NATO process in terms of Ukraine? And secondly, with roughly, you know, like north of 2 million people that have been displaced, certainly not voluntarily, is the expectation amongst those that you've been in contact, do they want to go back once peace comes and resettle and rebuild Ukraine, or are they looking to build a new life outside of the Ukraine? Thank you.
Good question. Well, for NATO, there was a NATO meeting back in the 2008, I think it was, in Romania. And Putin was trying to tell George Bush at the time that Ukraine is not a real country and it doesn't exist, and the people there are not wanting that sort of thing, and it isn't worth the effort. Well, Ukrainians have shown that it is an effort. They're demonstrating that they're willing to die for their country, and they're willing to establish a country, especially after they've declared. There's already a whole 30 years is already a generation of young people who already don't know anything about Russia, don't want to know anything about Russia in the sense of being part of them. They don't want to be a part of them. They want to be independent. They've traveled the world. They understand what the world is like. Many of them speak English. So they understand. They're beginning to be more educated. So there's an awareness of that. So in that sense, so for NATO in itself doesn't. The countries that belong to NATO see that that they already have members, and they don't want to expand it because it's going to, for them, they see that as costing them a lot of money, because you have to build up your military. You have to build it up to the point where it will deter a country of Russia to invade their. Excuse me for a second. Okay, my apologies. So essentially, we have countries that would have to expend a lot of money to build up their military. As far as Ukraine is concerned with refugees, you're going to have refugees probably going to stay because they have to earn a living. They're willing to go back to their country once they've made enough money to help rebuild the country. And it's going to be an effort on not just the refugees, but it's going to be an effort on the part of all countries to help rebuild. I mean, we rebuilt Europe after the Second World War through the Marshall Plan, George Marshall, and to establishing a workable economic environment for infrastructure, trade, housing, and so on. I mean, that was a big undertaking, but it was worth it in the end because Europe prospered, and I don't see that being any different today. Okay, there's another hand. Somebody was raising it.
Yeah,
hello.
It's Bill here.
Oh, hi, Bill.
Thank you, Andrew. I learned a lot from your presentation. I was going to mention, though, that the Ukrainians had their own revolution, I think in 2012, the Revolution of Dignity, I believe it was called, where
That's
they
right.
tossed out some of the oligarchs who have been running Russia currently, or at least the Ukrainian oligarchs who were doing it. So can you shed some more light on that?
Well, the revolution of dignity occurred at that time when Ukraine. You see, it was in a transition period from a post-Soviet approach. Oligarchs are running the country. There's a lot of corruption, and the way forward was to integrate with Europe economically, and for Ukrainians to be able to sell their goods, be able to go and get educated in Europe, travel to Europe, and so on. And Ukrainians didn't before at the time, and so the wish was so strong for them. I mean, when I came to Ukraine to work there, I mean, they were so curious about you living in Canada and what's it like there, and your thinking is different the way we think, and we like the way you guys do things, and we like the way you guys think. That sort of thing. So it really got the ball rolling. And so you end up having politicians competing. And Yanukovych, who represented the pro-Russia orientation, Putin wanted him to win, but that didn't work out. And so this dignity part is the fact that being enslaved, being controlled, it's a police state. You had no real rights there. They were all declared rights, but in practice they weren't there, and so people couldn't really do very much. So you couldn't really develop yourself as an individual. You couldn't develop yourself in a business. You couldn't really do that because you had to kowtow to the powers that be, and it was through corruption, and you couldn't really connect with people on an independent. You couldn't even establish your own network, and so the Ukrainians saw this as a way to defy authorities, and so in the end, it resulted. First of all, you had the students out in the plaza area, followed by the vast population coming in from all over the country. Then the government got or the government in power was getting rather nervous, and so their police opened fired on them, if you remembered that. And then after that event occurred, then the Russian government sent these agents into Ukraine to take over buildings in the eastern part of Ukraine, which is the Donbass area, okay, and also in Crimea. So this was what was occurring at the time. So Putin knew that he was losing Ukraine because the population wasn't willing to kowtow to him. And so the easiest pick for him was to get Crimea and the Donbass, because he assumed, because the local population spoke Russian, that they would be supportive of him. The truth is, a lot of the refugees that we have, not just in Windsor, but Europe and elsewhere, wherever they fled, a lot of them fled westward. A lot of them live internally in Ukraine, in the western part of the country. And their mentality is not a Russian mentality. The fact that someone speaks Russian does not necessarily mean that they think like a Russian. They just might know the language. And so Putin is, it's like Quebec. Is France prepared to come in and conquer Quebec because we got a French-speaking population? Or that sort of thing. This is where there's such a flaw in the logic of Putin's explanation for why he invaded the country. Okay, all the very obtuse ideas that really don't meet the sense of reality for the people that live there. If you're looking at even the television news today, when Ukraine's army is liberating these towns and cities and villages, you see the local population are happy to see them return, because even though that they were speaking Russian, it didn't mean that they were pro-Russian. It didn't mean that they wanted to be ruled by Russia. It didn't mean they want to be part of Russia. The United States and Canada, we're both English-speaking countries. Does it mean that all Canadians want to be American just because we have a neighbor next door? I mean, that's what that kind of, you have to sort of think of it in that analogy, in terms of a reality. So it's just the day-to-day contacts that people have there.
Thank you.
Any questions?
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. Jude, could I ask you to thank?
Yes. Yes, thank you so much, Andrew. It's an area of the world that I personally don't know a lot about the history of, so I greatly appreciate you expanding on that and giving us some updates on what's happening now and what we can do to help. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I appreciate you inviting me for this session. Like I said, if the Rotary Club wants to do any help, I'll be more than happy to email the web links to Bruce and locally and stuff nationally, if you're willing to do that.
Hi, Andrew. I'm Bruce.
Hey, Terry.
So yes, if you don't mind emailing it, we have recorded the meeting, so we can see it after. But
Okay, I'll do that today.
okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
And what we normally do is we do a joker draw as a little fundraiser. So Andrew, if you could put your hand out and choose a ticket. Terry. There you go. Okay, thank you.